Do you ever lie in bed at night wondering why you feel so empty despite having more opportunities than any generation before you? Or maybe you know someone who seems to have everything but still feels completely lost and unmotivated? If this sounds familiar, keep watching because what I'm about to reveal might completely change how you see your struggles. We exist in an unprecedented age where virtually everything appears accessible with a simple tap or click. Knowledge, entertainment, social interaction, all delivered within moments. Never before have we possessed such abundant resources, countless alternatives, endless diversions, and yet, ironically, never have we experienced such profound lack of drive. This expanding indifference affecting countless individuals worldwide gets frequently misinterpreted as laziness, poor self-control, or even character defects. But what if this interpretation is fundamentally flawed? What if the issue isn't missing motivation, but rather an overwhelming flood of stimulation that crushes any chance of authentic self-discovery? This represents precisely the argument many modern researchers have been promoting, and it echoes powerfully with the insights of Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived extreme wartime hardship. Frankl witnessed his entire family taken from him during World War II and endured years confronting unimaginable challenges, loss, and suffering. Nevertheless, he discovered within himself a resilience that didn't stem from pleasure or hopes of liberation, but from something far more profound: purpose. According to Frankl, humans are driven primarily by a will to meaning. It isn't the chase for comfort, pleasure, or achievement that sustains us, but our capacity to assign significance to our lives, particularly during the most challenging moments. This perspective casts a troubling light on today's reality. If authentic motivation springs from meaning, what occurs when an entire culture becomes conditioned to pursue only pleasure and distraction? What happens to the human spirit when every instant of boredom gets filled with videos, every pause occupied by notifications, every silence overwhelmed by external noise? This content offers a revolutionary perspective. Perhaps you aren't unmotivated. Perhaps you're simply exhausted. Exhausted from pursuing goals that aren't truly yours, from consuming content that adds no value, from existing in perpetual distraction. The absence of motivation in this context isn't a flaw, it's a signal, a warning that something more fundamental has been lost in the chaos. And this is exactly what we'll examine: how modern hyperstimulation erodes our capacity to discover purpose, how silence, emptiness, and discomfort, now avoided at all costs, are actually doorways to self-rediscovery, and how the wisdom of a person who survived history's darkest chapter can still guide us through today's technological and existential turmoil. If you've ever felt lost, drained, unable to take action despite knowing what must be done, this video speaks directly to you, because perhaps your spirit isn't defeated. Perhaps it's simply trying to communicate that it's time to return home. The human brain wasn't engineered to handle the relentless bombardment of stimulation that characterizes contemporary existence. Through millennia of evolution, our minds adapted to natural rhythms of activity and rest, concentration and relaxation, engagement and reflection. However, recent decades have brought dramatic transformation. We've entered an era of hyperstimulation where every moment of quiet gets invaded by alerts, glowing screens, artificial sounds, and an information avalanche competing for our attention constantly. What once represented downtime, moments for contemplation, feeling, simply existing, now appears as lost opportunity. Technology, rather than serving consciousness, has frequently become anesthesia for the soul. We scroll through infinite feeds not because the content matters to us, but because we cannot endure silence. We binge series, watch short clips, consume news frantically, not to learn or develop, but to escape. Escape from what? From ourselves. This behavior creates profound consequences. Dopamine, the brain chemical linked to motivation and reward, gets constantly triggered by minor digital stimulation bursts. But these bursts remain shallow and artificial. The more we expose ourselves, the more insensitive we become to life's natural rewards. What once inspired us, meaningful conversations, creative projects, peaceful walks, begins feeling boring. Our brains, addicted to novelty and instant gratification, forget how to appreciate the profound, the gradual, the meaningful. This represents the hidden source of modern demotivation. Easy pleasure destroys genuine motivation. When every small pause gets filled with digital rewards, we lose our ability to desire deeply. It's not that you don't want to transform your life, it's that your reward system is being hijacked by stimuli that merely simulate accomplishment. This leads to an even more disturbing realization. If we're constantly fleeing boredom, aren't we also fleeing the questions that truly count? Because it's in silence, in stimulus absence, that existence's great questions surface. As Viktor Frankl cautioned us, reflecting on human suffering and modern existential vacuum, contemporary individuals have less time to reflect, less courage to make decisions, and less freedom to discover their own meaning. Yet it's precisely this ability to find personal meaning that maintains human dignity. What happens to a mind that never rests, never quiets, never gets permission to simply exist without stimulation, without expectations, without distraction? The answer is straightforward yet devastating. It fragments. The overloaded mind doesn't think, it merely reacts. It doesn't contemplate, it consumes. Over time, this mind loses its most valuable capability, reflection. Reflecting transcends thinking. It means stepping back and observing, allowing thoughts to settle, emotions to form, values to reveal themselves. Within this internal space of silence and processing, we construct our identity, understand our experiences, connect with what genuinely matters. But when every microsecond gets invaded by new stimulation, this space erodes. In its place emerges a frantic, anxious mind incapable of maintaining deeper reasoning, much less an existential search for meaning. The exhausted mind seeks relief, not clarity. And that's where danger lies. Because a mind seeking only relief becomes dependent on anything promising quick escape. Social media, food, pornography, shopping, excessive productivity, anything distracting from immediate discomfort, even at the cost of long-term well-being. This is the trap. Excessive stimulation prevents deep thinking, and the absence of deep thought condemns us to repeat identical empty patterns daily. Furthermore, the exhausted mind loses touch with itself. Without introspective moments, we no longer recognize our genuine emotions. We don't know what we want. We cannot identify what truly drives us. We become subject to external impulses, living according to what gets suggested, advertised, or imposed upon us, rather than what emerges from within. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard declared that the greatest form of despair is choosing to be something other than oneself. But how can one choose to be oneself if there's never time to discover oneself? The non-reflective mind becomes alienated from its own essence, and it's precisely this alienation state that feeds what we call demotivation. Because when we're disconnected from our emotions, our values, our most authentic goals, any action feels forced, artificial. Motivation doesn't arise from nothing. It's the byproduct of inner connection. And this connection requires silence, requires space, requires pause. As Viktor Frankl stated, between stimulus and response lies a space. In that space exists our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. But what happens when that space gets destroyed? When there's no longer an interval between stimulus and response? When there's no choice, only automatic reaction? It's common hearing phrases like, "I feel trapped," "I can't do anything," "Something's draining me from inside." These expressions aren't just outbursts, they're diagnoses. In a world revolving around productivity, performance, and high achievement, feeling unmotivated gets treated as personal failure, as if the person were broken, as if something were missing inside them. But what if the truth is opposite? What if this apathy actually symptoms a sick system, a soul suffocated by superficiality? In this context, demotivation isn't weakness, it's protest. It's the muffled cry of a psyche that can no longer chase empty goals, impose targets, stimuli promising happiness, but delivering emptiness. It's the silent collapse of someone who spent too much time living externally without ever looking inward. It's not that you don't want to act, it's that you're tired of acting without purpose. It's not that you lack strength, It's that you've already exhausted your energy trying to adapt to a life that doesn't represent you. The demotivation symptom reveals a painful truth. We're trying to force movement where there's lack of meaning. We're attempting to rekindle flame using false fuel. And the soul knows. It feels when something is shallow, when there's no truth, when we're merely playing roles. That's when paralysis arises. Not because we're incapable, but because we're disconnected from what truly moves us. Imagine a plant placed in poor soil, exposed to artificial light 24 hours daily. Can it grow? Perhaps, but it will be weak, pale, disconnected from its natural rhythm. This is what happens to the human mind when it lives immersed in constant stimulation, incessant demands, without time to root itself in its own being. Demotivation in this case is the body saying we need to stop. It's the soul saying we need to go home. Frankl already warned about this with surgical precision. When a person cannot find deep meaning in life, they distract themselves with pleasures. But distraction isn't fulfillment, and when emptiness returns, because it always does, we realize the problem wasn't lack of movement, but lack of direction. What we need isn't more productivity, but reconnection. And that's where we enter Viktor Frankl's profound thinking, who survived extreme wartime imprisonment to teach us something many forget. Real motivation doesn't arise from comfort, but from purpose. During one of humanity's darkest periods, Viktor Frankl survived extreme wartime conditions and imprisonment. He witnessed humanity's worst cruelties. He saw people lose everything: family, dignity, identity. He saw individuals reduced to numbers, lives stripped down to mere survival. And even there, amid hunger, pain, and loss, he identified something remarkable. Some managed to maintain life's spark, not because they were physically stronger or luckier, but for a much deeper reason. They still had a why. Frankl realized that those with clear sense of something or someone to live for, a purpose greater than themselves, were the ones who resisted psychological collapse. He called this the will to meaning, and made this idea the heart of his psychotherapeutic approach, logotherapy. For Frankl, human beings aren't motivated, as Freud claimed, by pleasure pursuit, nor, as Adler suggested, by power pursuit. The deepest human drive is finding meaning in existence. When that meaning is absent, existential emptiness arises, the same emptiness we today camouflage with distractions, toxic productivity, and incessant stimuli. The most impressive aspect of Frankl's work is realizing that meaning can be found even in pain. Even in extreme suffering, there's room for dignity, for choice, for transcendence. Life never ceases to have meaning, he said, even facing inevitable suffering. This completely challenges modern logic that we need to feel well to produce, that we need motivation to act. Frankl reverses this. Often it's by acting with meaning that we rediscover strength. Purpose isn't luxury, it's a basic psychological need. This understanding changes everything. If motivation depends on meaning, then its absence isn't weakness but disconnection from what truly matters. And this disconnection intensifies when we live for empty goals. Status, social validation, numbers, appearances. Frankl invites us to ask different questions. What am I living for? Not how to have more energy, but why is it worth getting out of bed? Not how to be more productive, but what truly moves me. In his words, man is capable of enduring anyhow as long as he has a why. And that why doesn't need to be something grand. It can be a child, a personal mission, an ideal, even a simple task lived with authenticity. The essential thing is that it's genuine, comes from within, connects you to something greater than the immediacy of now. But how to rediscover this meaning in a life overtaken by noise, distractions, and pressures? How to make space for this reconnection to happen? In a society where stimulation absence gets almost seen as threat, discussing silence sounds like heresy. Silence confronts us. It forces us to hear what we've been avoiding. Our most chaotic thoughts, our most repressed pains, our most uncomfortable questions. Yet it's precisely in this seemingly hostile territory that the key to reconnecting with what truly matters resides. Modern humans have been conditioned to fear emptiness. They cannot stand waiting, cannot tolerate being alone, don't know how to simply be. But this emptiness, this space unfilled by stimuli, isn't mistake. It's invitation. An invitation to pause, observe, reorganize. Because only when noise ceases can we hear consciousness's voice. Only when excess dissolves can the essential emerge. Frankl said life demands response from each of us, but to respond, one must first listen. And listening in this saturated world has become forgotten art. We're so accustomed to constant information flow, opinions, and external expectations that we've become deaf to our own inner call. This call isn't loud or spectacular. It's subtle, whispered in the gap between thoughts, and can only be captured when we create space for silence. Turning off the phone, refusing another task, saying no to what's not essential. All this may seem uncomfortable initially, but this discomfort signals you're stepping out of automatic mode. It's clarity's harbinger. Because before motivation comes silence, before aligned action comes honest listening, before purpose comes confrontation with what you've been avoiding. Yes, silence can be disconcerting. It can expose insecurities, doubts, resentments, but it can also reveal forgotten values, authentic desires, unexplored directions. The discomfort we feel in stimulation's absence isn't the enemy. It's the beginning of the reintegration process. It's in this space that the soul, previously stifled by constant noise, begins whispering truths we've ignored too long. As Viktor Frankl wrote, each of us has to find in his own life a unique meaning, a mission that is his. No life can be replaced, no destiny can be repeated, each one is irreplaceable. But how to hear this mission, how to recognize this call if we never stop to listen? There comes a moment when you can no longer continue living on autopilot. A moment when emptiness speaks louder than distraction, when fatigue cannot be relieved by another video, another scroll, another task. This is the rupture moment, and paradoxically, it's also the starting point. Because when we stop seeking outside what can only be found within, we finally begin moving in the right direction. True motivation isn't loud. It doesn't come with easy promises or ready-made formulas. It doesn't arise from desire to please others, meet external goals, or follow imposed standards. It emerges when you contact what's non-negotiable within you, your deepest values, your forgotten dreams, your rawest truth. It's a silent but relentless force, a spark that once ignited completely transforms how you act in the world. And this doesn't require heroism. It doesn't demand grand gestures or radical changes. It starts with the simple, turning off noise, taking an honest look at yourself, the small act of saying, "This no longer serves me." And with the movement of going against chaos, stopping frantic running in all directions, and beginning to walk inward. Because it's in this internal space that purpose takes shape. It's there you begin acting not from obligation but from meaning, not from impulse but by choice, not to escape but to express who you truly are. Demotivation isn't flaw, it's invitation. A call to stop living on the surface and dive into what's real. A sign that it's time to reconnect, make silence, regain your own presence, act with intention. Viktor Frankl survived extreme adversity and emerged with a powerful truth. Everything can be taken from a person except one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given circumstances, to choose one's own way. You still have that freedom, even now, and you can use it to interrupt the superficiality cycle and begin a new narrative. One where you're no longer at stimulu's mercy but guided by purpose. If this message resonated with you, tell us in the comments. What will you leave behind starting today? What noise will you silence to hear your own voice? And if this made sense to you, keep watching. The next video is equally important. It might be exactly what you need to hear right now, because the path to purposeful living doesn't end here. It's just beginning. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and remember, your struggle with motivation isn't a character flaw. It's your soul calling you home.